Hey, Care Friends. How's it going? I wanted to pop in here today and say hi and let you know how much I miss you all. That's pretty weird not seeing you each week. So I thought that this week I would get us started on the book. My original plans were that I would do a read aloud of the beginning of the book that we're going to start reading this week, taking a break from comprehension and collaboration, and we're going to start reading The Reluctant Disciplinarian. This book right here saved my life. When I first started teaching, my first semester, my classroom was completely out of control. I used to have that first semester, I had horrible nightmares about teaching. Every day, I would get up in the morning, I would feel sick to my stomach. I'd be too nervous to eat because I was so scared about what was going to happen during the day and what new horrible thing my students were going to do. So as the day would progress, various unpleasant things would happen. One class in particular was just out of control every single day. Once that class was over and I had fourth period planning, I would be exhausted and I would just collapse and I would feel so much better. I'd feel this enormous sense of relief that class was over and I could go home soon. So I would feel better. I'd go home. I'd be able to eat dinner. Right about dinner time, I would start thinking, I have to go back again tomorrow. And then I would not be able to sleep, wouldn't be able to eat. It was a horrible, horrible cycle. By the time I got to the end of the first semester, I thought, I cannot keep this up. My classes they would talk over me. They didn't pay attention to me. There was nothing wrong with the students, but there was something wrong with me. And so over Christmas break, I went out and I bought as many books as I could about classroom management. And this book was one of them that I just picked up at the local Borders in Columbus. And, maybe it was Barnes & Noble, probably Barnes & Noble. Got this book, read it and several other books over Christmas break. This book was the one that resonated with me the most. It has, you're going to see what it has in it. But the main thing it has in it is a really good dose of humor. So you're going to see things that you're going to read things in this book that you're going to think, this doesn't really seem super progressive. And that's absolutely true. We're going to talk about those things as we go along in the book, but I'm here to tell you this. If your classroom is out of control, you can't do any progressive teaching methods because you won't be able to get a word in edgewise. The only choice you'll have is kids sitting in a straight row in absolute silence if you don't have some fairly decent classroom management. So we're going to get started today reading this book. And the very first part, The Accidental Teacher, this just tells you a little bit about our author, Gary Rubenstein. His whole premise of this book is that he's going to tell you the mistakes that he made so you don't make those same mistakes. And the very first part, the basis of the very first part is just that he was too lazy to fill out his law school application. And so he became a teacher instead through Teach for America. So he basically went into the classroom with no teacher training. Okay, so I'm going to read you just this first chapter. It's got great pictures too. The history of assault. Knowing that how well you do something is at least as important as why you choose to do it, I worked hard to learn as much as I could at the demanding TFA, Teach for America, Institute. Mornings, we did our student teaching. Afternoons, we met with Institute faculty, an amazing hand-picked team of mentors from across the country. Evenings, we read up on educational methodology and planned and graded for the following day. I learned as much as a person can learn about teaching in 2 short months. 2 months, that's not long enough. One of the topics I studied was discipline. I had reason to suspect that it was not going to be one of my biggest strengths. A shaky start. My first experience as a disciplinarian came when I was 5 years old. This is clearly the family dog. I was helping my father housebreak the family dog, a Great Dane named Smokey. Each time Smokey urinated on the living room plants, we would punish him. My father would drag the dog to the yellow puddle and begin by hitting, then screaming at him. After Dad was finished, I would go over to the dog and pat his head, telling Smokey that he was a good boy and that I loved him. As a result of my sympathy, it took years for the dog to stop vandalizing our home. The first time I commanded a schoolroom was 5 years later, when I was in the 4th grade. My teacher left the room, placing me, the class treasurer, in charge. My instructions were simple. While the class worked on a math assignment, I was to write down the names of anyone who talked. 5 minutes after the teacher left, a boy called me to his desk. "How do you do this one?" he asked. While I was helping him, 2 girls on the other side of the room began conversing. I speedily wrote their names on my snitch paper. One of the girls noticed and immediately protested. "If you write our names, you have to write his name too," she said, referring to the boy I was helping. "That's different. He was asking for help." "Well, I was asking her for help," she responded. "It's the same thing." Several others entered the argument. The consensus was that I should either write all 3 names or none of the names on the list. I disagreed, explaining that I would leave the 2 girls' names and add the names of those who had spoken in the girls' defense. The students continued to argue that my name should go on the list as well, since I was also talking. Unable to respond intelligently to such logic, I allowed the class to manipulate me into writing down my own name. When the teacher returned, I sheepishly handed her the list and went back to my seat. The conspicuous appearance of my name on the paper invalidated its credibility, so no one got in trouble. From my early years, my natural tendency has always been to be an overly sympathetic softie whom students could easily manipulate. And with that trait, I began my student teaching in the summer of 1991. Student teaching with Ms. Kowalski. Having heard how difficult junior high students can be, I had requested a student teaching assignment in high school. Instead, I was sent to an urban junior high in California. My mentor was a teacher named Ms. Kowalski, a strict disciplinarian. Her strategy was to train her students like dogs. Following her lead, I treated them like dogs too, just like Smokey. When Mrs. Kowalski would yell at a student, reducing him to tears, I would soon be patting him on the back, telling him not to worry. In front of the class, I didn't have many discipline problems. If a student got out of hand, I would merely say, "I'm telling Miss Kowalski," and he would immediately behave. At my going away party, the students gave me a standing ovation when the principal presented me with an honorary diploma. After he left, Mr. Kowalski yelled at one of the girls for cheering too loudly. The girl began to cry, and I, of course, consoled her. 6 weeks of training had not hardened my classroom persona. I was still a marshmallow. I was about to be roasted. My first teaching job. After student teaching, I got a job at a middle school in a large city. I was screaming at students by the end of the first week. My requests for silence quickly went from "please be respectful of others" to "please be quiet" to "be quiet." Later it was "shh," then "shush," then "shut up," and finally "shut up." In a last desperate effort to gain control, I warned them, "I'm telling Mrs. Kowalski." Once I was absent, my class tortured the substitute. When I was absent, the class tortured the substitute. They set a fire in the garbage can. They threw some books out the window. When I returned the next day, I reprimanded them harshly. "Why can't you be that good for me?" I asked. During my first year, I was hit by students on 3 different occasions. Rather than expel students for something that was a result of my incompetence, school officials made what was called a disciplinary exchange with another school. One time, they traded a chronic truant and a student who had hit me for 2 graffiti artists and a delinquent to be named later. A stronger second year. By my second year of teaching, I had learned a few things. I had learned that any time a teacher makes a blanket threat such as "the next student who talks is getting detention," the first one to break the silence will be the quietest student in the class. 100%. This is true. It is tempting to say instead, the next bad student who talks is getting detention. I had learned to implement logical consequences, making punishment more meaningful by relating it to the crime. If the students threw paper, I made them clean the room. If they came late, I made them stay after class. If they talked too much, I made an appointment for them to meet with the mutual fund salesman who camped in the staff office. Additionally, I had learned to mask any remaining softness with the teacher look. My look became so effective that I could crying babies on airplanes or silence obnoxious people sitting behind me at the movies. My most powerful look I reserved for halting volcanoes and other natural disasters. A successful third year. By the end of my third year of teaching, I was doing fine. I had made the difficult transformation from born pushover to real teacher. In my fourth year, I was even named Teacher of the Year at my school. Was I an expert? No. However, I learned a lot in my struggle to learn effective classroom management. Most important, I had learned how to make my classroom a place where students could be successful. All right, so that's a little teaser of the book that we're going to be reading for next week. So before, let's see, today must be the 17th. So before you've already watched this. So yeah, so next week you're going to be getting started on reading The Reluctant Disciplinarian. I hope my little teaser reading has gotten you started. 100%. I guarantee that you will at least enjoy reading this book. It's probably the least academic book you'll read all year. All right. See you soon, friends.